This hearing will come to order. As this hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters. For today's hearing, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent or advertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. We're going to try to do 2 rounds today, folks. So please try not to ask the most lengthy, complicated question with 30 seconds left. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved. And you will retain the balance of your time. You'll notice a clock on your screen that will show you how much time is remaining. At the 1-minute mark, the clock will turn to yellow. At 30 seconds, I will gently tap the non-existent gavel to remind members that time has almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, then members present at the time the hearing is called in order will be recognized in order of seniority, and finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that you have set up an email account to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings and markups. That email address has been provided in advance to staff. This morning, or this afternoon, we welcome the Acting Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Shalonda Young. I should say we welcome back because the committee knows the Acting Director very well. She worked for the committee for 14 years, serving as Democratic Staff Director beginning in 2017. I am thrilled that President Biden has chosen Ms. Young for this role. He could not have made a better choice for one of the government's most important and influential positions. Be warned, Ms. Young, that we know well the great job you did on the Appropriations Committee, and we have equally high expectations for you in your new role. In Chicago, instead of saying to the spoils go, the victors go the spoils, it's the other way around. So congratulations, sometimes condolences. The task is at hand. We know you'll do great. We last had OMB testify before this committee in March 2020, and obviously a big difference in a year. At that time, we heard about a budget that aimed to drastically shrink almost every part of the federal government except for defense. That view of limited government has not aged well. It was swift action by Congress and execution by federal agencies that allowed us to deliver much needed support to the American people during the COVID pandemic and develop the vaccines that are helping us emerge from this crisis. This year's budget builds upon the lessons of the last year by recognizing the important role of the government in making long overdue investments in critical domestic programs. The budget proposes necessary increases to ensure that we can deal with the lingering effects of the pandemic and help us become more resilient against future crises. It takes steps to address the structural, economic, and racial inequalities highlighted by the pandemic, alleviate poverty, and ensure that we have a society that works for everyone. It recognizes the urgency of taking aggressive action to mitigate an existential threat to America and the rest of the world, climate change. I look forward to discussing these proposals with you in more detail, Acting Director. What is true in the large scale is also true in the smaller scale. The last administration undermined the authority of OMB career staff, overrode their expertise to legally delay and divert funds, and attempted to remove their job security. Many experienced staffers left the agency, and we fear that may have left federal service forever. According to the most recent Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, job satisfaction at most agencies improved in 2020, but it plunged at OMB by 16%. This year, the new leadership team is placing a priority on supporting and expanding the OMB career staff. The agency is asking for $121.9 million in fiscal year 22, a 14.3% increase over fiscal 21 to help rebuild the agency's expertise and morale. Acting Director, I look forward to discussing with you in more detail these OMB initiatives and how you will leverage the experience you gained at the committee to maximize the impact of any new federal agency. Again, congratulations on your new role. Before we turn to the acting director, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Mr. Womack for his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back to the committee, Acting Director Young. Let me congratulate you on your confirmation. Thank you for your years of service to the committee and the American people. We've missed you, but are pleased that such a talented and dedicated person is managing the budget process for the new administration. Let me just say, as a matter of personal pride, the work that you helped us do on the Joint Select Committee on Budget Process for future activities along that front. You're in charge of time as the country struggles with the health and economic impact of COVID-19. I appreciate the hard work of all the staff mandatory and discretionary spending, along with massive tax increases. I'm concerned that the excessive level of federal spending by this administration will lead to both inflation and historically high debt that will hinder the recovery and burden future generations of Americans. I'm also troubled that while proposing significant spending increases for most agencies and programs, the administration's discretionary proposal shortchanges the resource needs of our military and for border security. Our nation faces real national security threats from adversaries such as China and Iran, and now is not the time to be complacent. Regarding the border, I've seen firsthand the crisis currently underway. I would encourage you and every senior official in the administration to visit the border and observe how dire the conditions at our southwest border have become. We should be increasing resources for border security instead of ignoring the situation and allowing this humanitarian crisis to continue. I'm also very troubled with the administration's tax proposals. I don't see how increasing taxes on American corporations will unleash economic growth, create jobs, and help American companies compete globally. I understand the administration can propose an aspirational budget, especially in a year without budget caps. However, I hope that you will work with leaders on both sides of the aisle as this process unfolds to come to bipartisan and bicameral agreements. Using partisan tools such as reconciliation to force through the current majority's policies is not a long-term solution to our challenges, especially during times when the majority party frequently changes from one Congress to the next. Regarding the budget request for OMB, I believe a 14% increase over the current year is excessive. However, I will work with Chairman Quigley to ensure that you have an appropriate level of resources to complete OMB's important work. Director Young, I look forward to working with you in your new position, hopeful to have a successful bipartisan appropriations process this year, and let's pray that we can get it on time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. Next, I will turn to our distinguished chair of the full committee, Ms. DeLauro.
Thank you, Chairman Quigley, and thank you, Ranking Member Womack. And I am delighted to be here today to welcome Acting Director Shalonda Young back to the Appropriations Committee and offer my congratulations. During her 14-year service on this committee staff, I saw firsthand her commitment to America's working families. And Acting Director Young understands the profound role that government can play in improving people's lives. She understands that while ensuring our government services and programs are effectively funded and efficiently managed may not seem like the most exciting role of government, but it is the most important. Like the Appropriations Committee, the work of the Office of Management and Budget touches every aspect of our daily lives. By distributing funding to the programs and services that need it most, OMB encourages jobs, businesses, communities, opportunities, and our nation to grow, which is also what the Biden-Harris administration's budget does by sowing the seeds of prosperity in the lives of working families, the middle class, and the vulnerable. It begins a long process of growing our nation back from the desolation of this pandemic and the decades of disinvestment that have starved our communities for far too long. More specifically, the Biden-Harris administration's budget increases investments for schools and childcare. It protects workers and strengthens the safety net. It expands local food systems and works to address the existential threat of climate change. It begins to rebuild our public health infrastructure, provides millions for gun violence research, and makes investments to address the opioid, mental health, and maternal health crises. I'm especially pleased that it enables more women to access safe, affordable reproductive health care, and I am proud that it not only strengthens our nation at home, but restores America's place in the world. I might add that this budget blueprint would not be what it is today without the tireless and dedicated work of the OMB staff, including Acting Director Young. That is why I'm glad to see a funding request of $121 million for OMB, an increase that would boost the morale of OMB's public servants and restore expertise to an agency that has been abused over the past 4 years. I am eager to get to work, turning this blueprint into funding bills that will meet the challenges and the opportunities of this historic moment. So again, I say thank you to you, Acting Director Young, for your work, and thank Chairman Quigley and Ranking Member Womack, and I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And Acting Director, I want to thank you again for being here today. Without objection, your full written testimony will be entered into the record. With that in mind, we ask for you to please summarize your opening statement in about 5 minutes. And before you begin, let me just say, from my heart, and I think most members feel this way, I don't know of anyone in government who has earned their position through hard work, dedication, and accomplishments than you. So again, thank you for your service, and thanks again for being here today.
Well, thank you, Chairman Quigley, Ranking Member Womack, Chairwoman DeLauro, and I would say members of the subcommittee, but really it's more like friends and family. This is surreal. It's like talking to extended family members and coming back home. I know you'll be tough on me today, and we'll have a healthy dialogue, but I really can't tell you what it feels like to come back and talk to all of you in this position. And thank you for the chance to be here today. The President's fiscal year 2022 budget request for the Office of Management and Budget to discuss the details many of you have outlined. The full request of $121.9 million represents a 14% increase over last year's enacted level, consistent with the budget's general approach to restore staff capacity at agencies after a decade of harmful spending caps. This increase would allow OMB to rebuild the agency's career staff and to continue its pivotal role in developing and executing the President's budget, overseeing the performance of federal agencies and ensuring an efficient and accountable government, which I think are goals we all share. The incredibly hardworking career staff at OMB have been running a marathon, and they need these critical resources to continue effectively serving the American people long after my tenure with the institution is over. The fiscal year 2022 request reflects an investment in our outstanding career workforce at a moment when OMB has taken on numerous new responsibilities and faced persistent staffing shortages. Over many years, OMB staffing levels have declined and staff have been realigned across the agency, leaving many offices at historically low staffing levels, as much as 30% below fiscal year 2012 levels in some instances. The requested increase is entirely for career positions, and more than half of the estimated increase in staffing is for existing positions that OMB has not been able to fill since fiscal year 2020. OMB is also requesting $10.4 million for the Information and Technology Oversight and Reform Fund, what we like to call ITOR. The requested ITOR funding also represents an investment in staff, enabling the OFCIO to reach 46 full-time employees. This staffing level is critical to the delivery of the OFCIO's important mission of providing strategic direction and oversight for the development and management of IT and cybersecurity across the federal government in the wake of SolarWinds and other recent attacks. OMB's request also includes funding to restore a paid intern program, which I know many of you on the Hill are operating under and helped start on Capitol Hill. That is key, we believe, to establishing a strategic recruitment and outreach effort to strengthen the pipeline of diverse and historically underrepresented candidates into OMB, and to promote the administration's efforts to advance equity, remove barriers to equal opportunity, and attract top talent that reflects the full diversity of this nation. I'll point out I started in federal budgeting through the Presidential Management Intern Programs, now the Fellow Program. So these programs really do create a pipeline that pays dividends. Before I close, I would like to speak to the President's overall fiscal year 2022 budget request. Under the President's leadership, our country is getting back on track after one of the most challenging periods in our history. At least 63% of Americans have now received one vaccine shot. The economy has added 2 million jobs since the President took office. The unemployment rate has dropped to 5.8%, the lowest since the start of the pandemic. A very encouraging sign is the decline we see in the long-term unemployed by 431,000 last month, as well as the decline in those seeking initial claims of unemployment by about half of what they were in January. All of this is due in no small part to the American Rescue Plan, which put money in pockets and shots in arms. The President's budget before you builds on this economic momentum to reimagine a new American economy that invests in the middle class and those trying to break into the middle class. The President's fiscal year 2022 budget details the President's agenda for this year to help grow the economy, create good-paying jobs, and do so responsibly by requiring the wealthiest Americans and big corporations to pay their fair share. It includes the two historic plans the President has already put forward, the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, and reinvest in education, research, public health, and other foundations of our country's strength through the discretionary request. The budget also calls on Congress to take action this year to lower prescription drug costs and expand and improve coverage. And it does all of this while proposing long overdue changes in our tax code that will improve our country's long-run fiscal health and help lay the foundation for shared prosperity. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We'll now turn to questions. With the utmost respect, I'll defer to the Chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. DeLauro, for any questions she might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me just, I have a couple of questions. I'll try to do it in the allotted time. The budget does propose sweeping generational changes, restructures the role of government, expands economic opportunity, improves education, deals with a climate crisis. But it also includes programs that continue to address the pandemic and its economic and health implications, the racial and economic equity, and public health infrastructure. As pointed out, that many of these proposals are in the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan, which is bundled together much of the administration's infrastructure, caregiving, and educational legislative proposal. The budget proposal is not about returning to normal. For far too many Americans, normal was never fair, equitable, or just. Can you discuss how the President's budget moves us forward to build that architecture for the future?
Madam Chair, that is a great point to start out with. We think we're on the right path thanks to the passage of the rescue plan to full recovery. We have 5.8% unemployment, the lowest has been since the start of the pandemic. We think that assistance has put us on the right track. What the Jobs and Families Plan is intended to do is exactly what the President has promised the American people before the pandemic was not good enough. We have to reimagine the economy so that all can share in the prosperity of this country. You talked about pandemic response. A lot of the pandemic spending last year was to play catch up because we had underinvested in public health and a lot of other discretionary places long before that. So you'll see this budget invest in CDC, provides a $1.6 billion, 23% increase, the largest in nearly 2 decades. And we think that's necessary to look forward and retool and make sure we're not just getting back to where we were, but building back better.
Mm-hmm. With looking at you mentioned the pandemic, and if you could just elaborate more on the investments across the agencies with respect to the pandemic resilience and recovery. Look, you know as well as I, and you know my view on sequestration and the damage that that's inflicted on the limits of non-defense discretionary spending. And you're right, that hindered our response to the pandemic. So just thinking about some of these investments and where you think that we were able to go with that, and if we have if the direction has been outlined for the future on this and post-pandemic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start with where I ended the last question. You'll see a 23% increase for CDC in this budget and the discretionary side. The budget also provides new flexible funding for public health infrastructure for states and territories, something many of them called for during the pandemic. It also includes funding to build international capacity to detect global emerging threats and pathogens, and it provides nearly $1 billion to restore the strategic national stockpile. In the jobs plan portion of the budget, we invest $30 billion over 4 years for pandemic preparedness. And this funding, we hope, will accelerate development of vaccines against pathogens for each of the viral families. So we have a good basis to respond to what hopefully is only once in a generation, but we owe it to future generations to be prepared.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And my last point would be to say is what my hope is that I think the rescue plan really laid out the parameters of where our focus is, and that is middle class, working families, the vulnerable, and the benefits are going there. My hope is that with both the jobs plan and with the families plan, that we will incorporate the infrastructure piece, but we will not leave behind the care economy and the infrastructure as well. Some of that is built in, and my hope is that as we move forward and we look at the negotiation around these issues, that we will not leave behind things like childcare and the long-term services in healthcare for people, that has got to be critical to buttressing both jobs, infrastructure, and a care economy that we need for that architecture for the future. Thank you.
Madam Chair, and you see all of that presented in the budget today.
Thank you very, very much. And again, congratulations. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Ranking Member Womack.
Thank you. Mr. Womack, you're next.
So that means you're going to defer your questions. The Bureau of Labor.
Well, I let the chairwoman of the full committee go before me, so I'll go after you.
And that is very gracious of you, Mr. Chairman. Director Young, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported last month that over the past year, CPI increased by 4.2%. The largest 12-month increase since September of 2008. I'm concerned that as the post-pandemic economy grows and the federal government is still spending as if we're in the height of the pandemic, inflation will continue to rear its ugly head. How high will the CPI have to increase before you believe it's a problem for Americans? Or do you believe this is really a temporary issue?
Thank you, Ranking Member Womack. Clearly, we have to watch this. We have a team of economists from Secretary Yellen, C.C. Rouse. Really, we also have to, acknowledge the Fed has the tools to deal with a lot of these issues, but we absolutely are keeping an eye on these. We do believe, though, that what we're seeing are base effects coming out of a pandemic year with depressed low prices. So it matters what you compare current prices to, and we aren't seeing the long-term indicators that would suggest that we're going anywhere close to the inflation levels I know many of us would be concerned about in the 70s. So we continue to monitor, but we're just not seeing the long-term effects and think we remain well anchored in the long run.
If inflation becomes a problem, or if it becomes a more long-term issue for the country, we all know that that's going to have an impact on interest rates, and those interest rates are going to impact how much money we're spending to satisfy our debt obligations. But if the inflation becomes a problem, will the administration consider reducing or maybe clawing back some of this federal spending? Because we've pumped a lot of money into an economy, and I don't think there's anybody on this call today that isn't hearing from their job creators about how many people they're looking for. They've got the help wanted sign out virtually everywhere in our country. And so we pumped a lot of money into the economy. We're creating a lot of demand because of this money. And then we're having difficulty matching the supply to the demand because we just don't have the available workforce. So like I say, if this becomes a problem or continues to be a problem, will you consider reducing the federal government's impact on it?
Ranking Member Womack, I want to make sure I point out, kind of as a reference to what I talked to the Chairwoman about, yes, we believe we appropriately spend it at a time when Americans were dying at a rapid rate of COVID for the rescue plan. Jobs and families make long-term investments where we don't see an overheating because we are pacing it out over a 10-year period, the spending. So we have hopefully thought about this issue of overheating in a responsible way where you see a long tail on the spending. This is about transformational change. And, I heard also a little, and I don't know if you want me to respond to the idea of, shortages, those people looking for jobs. I know some people have suggested unemployment enhanced benefits might play a role into that. That was always intended to be temporary. Those proposals do lapse in September. But before any of the ideas of pulling the $300 from some governors, which is their right to do, we still saw, I think, a strong growth pattern in the last job report with 559,000 jobs, including great numbers on low-wage jobs, which we like to see. But yeah, we're going to see wage growth. We have to see wage growth. People are going to have to pay their workers more. So I think these are complex issues. You're absolutely right. We're going to have to look at and pay close attention to, and this team is.
So a real quick question about debt and deficit, and then I'll yield back. And that is, we're in uncharted territory, in my opinion. Debt held by the public can grow from 21 trillion in fiscal 20 to 39 trillion in concerned about deficit spending if interest rates continue to rise, or if they go up, and which we all assume they will.
Ranking Member, you went out a little, but I think I got the gist of it. We do think it's important that we put forth a fiscally responsible plan. You may disagree with the offsets, but the president's policies are fully offset. Over a 15-year period, you see jobs and families fully offset. Over a 20-year period, you see a reduction in deficits of $2 trillion. Clearly, the debt is a different issue. We see the aging of our population and some other key measures. I know you know as former Budget Committee Chairman that play into those numbers. But we also have to look, we are living under low interest rate times. We're paying less on real debt service payments, which we think is a bigger indicator of fiscal health.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. I yield back.
Thank you. And just so you folks can check it out before I begin, your service seems to be popping in and out a little bit occasionally. But Acting Director, let me ask you, let's talk about the FBI building. The GSA comes through this subcommittee. In 2021, we included language requiring GSA to set up a plan for the new headquarters. During conference negotiations, that turned to statement language. But does the administration currently have a plan to provide to Congress about a new FBI building?
This administration is coming in a period we think is appropriate to review where we are with regard to the FBI building. We have to work with the FBI to figure out what the director believes is the appropriate scope and location. We don't believe we can just pick up where the last administration left off. So I would think you want us to take some time and make sure we get this right. It's not only a security issue. I'm sure you all have seen the Hoover building, Mr. Chairman. It's not in the best shape.
No, we have pieces of concrete landing on people's desks there. So obviously, not just for their safety, but for the efficient building that keeps us safe.
That's right. We have to look at the setback requirements. But, you know, the Obama administration had one plan. The Trump administration had another plan. The FBI director has thoughts on this. So I've had at least 2 meetings on this. We need to retool and figure out, hopefully a Biden administration plan that we can see to fruition, because the Hoover building situation can't continue.
And what are we basing this on now? And I'm not suggesting anything, I just don't know. Is it the administration's understanding that Congress needs to pass, enact a legal requirement to move the project forward?
I would never tell you what steps to take. I can imagine the frustration here as an issue that's been over now 3 administrations, continues to percolate. You're going to give us a certain amount of time to get this right. So I would never suggest, you know, how you go about expressing those frustrations. I will agree with you that what we have now cannot continue. But I do think we need to engage in a process with this administration to figure out what those parameters are. We know it makes sense for any government agency to have co-location. Right now, we're in many different buildings. We know the setback requirements can't be achieved necessarily at Hoover. So we are trying to work that out, but I would never suggest. I know it's a very frustrating process, and I've worked on this project for a long time from the other angle. So, you know, I share in that, and we want to move as quickly as possible.
Well, what's your understanding of what the FBI director wants? Has he expressed anything to this administration about timing or location or desires for the building?
I have not spoken directly to him, so until that happens, we've had staff speak. I would want to speak to him directly before I suggest his position on such an important issue. But we will be talking in short order about this, and make sure. I'd like to point out, I know you hear a lot from GSA, but GSA does what the client asks. So we need to get a good understanding of what the client believes its needs are, so that GSA can operate from that standpoint. And of course, OMB has some equities to make sure we're doing so with taxpayers in mind, and that we're making smart decisions. So we'll weigh into that, but GSA can only do what its client has scoped out, and we really need to work that out.
No, and as you sense, there's a sense of urgency on our side, on the congressional side, to move this forward and to get it, as you say, done right. Thank you. At this point, Mr. Amade is recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your courtesies. Shalonda, good to see you. I appreciate you contacting us before the meeting to talk about, I believe the phrase you used was how I was going to be mean to you or something like that. And after much reflection, I don't think I am capable of being mean to you. So I'll go ahead and follow offline on some of the stuff we talked about, the agencies, just in terms of follow-up and that sort of stuff. But congratulations, that's quite a distinguished background you have behind you there. Although I noticed there's a wire going to one of those doors. You ought to find out what that's about. I don't know whether it's a safety thing or a Big Brother thing or whatever, but anyhow, make sure you know what's going on with that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, since the ranking member took so much time in consideration of the committee's, the importance of the committee's time, I yield back.
And Mr. Chairman, can I say I'm in the appropriately named war room. I didn't know what I was coming into, so we're in the old war room in the old executive office building. But thank you, Mr. Amina, for taking it easy on me. But in all seriousness, I've always appreciated your thoughtfulness on issues, and I look forward to continuing to talk to you.
Yeah, let us know if there's any battle maps in there from days gone by. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Acting Director Young. It's great to see you. I want to talk about personnel. I want a little bit about quantitative, but a lot about qualitative. Your view of the matter. What we've seen, during my entire time in the Congress is an erosion of numbers of people working in the government. Following this philosophy that smaller government is better. And so we've seen things happen like, during the pandemic when we were depending on employees of the Treasury Department to get out relief money, checks, get relief out to the people in the entire nation. Because they had the numbers of people working in Treasury had been dwindling, and at the IRS over the years, they were unable to meet those requirements. And members of Congress like me and like all the other members of this committee, we would call up the IRS and want to help constituents get their relief money during the COVID crisis. And they didn't have enough people to answer the telephones. And then we look at the post office. What has happened to postal delivery service under this philosophy that less government is better and less money going into public services is better? Holy cow. I had somebody call me up and tell me that it took a month for a letter to be delivered from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania to Scranton, Pennsylvania, under the current postal service standards. But OMB, your department, over the past decade, there's been a decrease in full-time equivalents from 527 in 2010 to 466 in 2019. And in the current budget, of course, OMB is finally asking for an increase of 39 FTEs and some new paid internship programs. I fully approve of that, but I want you to comment, if you would, Acting Director Young. How have these issues of decreasing and fluctuating staff and losing people by attrition, as well as the erosion of expertise and morale under the prior administration, how have they affected the ability of OMB to be effective and do its job?
Well, one, I'm glad to talk to you about this in an appropriations committee setting, because these are not necessarily issues you get a lot of traction for. Really, if the appropriators don't pay attention to this, we often, forget about what these investments mean. A lot of people look at programs and spending. Well, it matters how we implement them. If we don't have the staff available, we miss things. So we really see a degradation of services to the American people, and we do a disservice. The career civil servant, let me tell you, there's a reason we hired a lot of Office of Management and Budget staff on the Appropriations Committee, both sides of the aisle. They are the ultimate professionals. You want them regardless of what party occupies the White House. They bring the expertise needed. They know the historical knowledge of these programs. They can tell you when you want to undertake a frankly not smart initiative and point out the 20 reasons why you shouldn't. You can still do it, but you can't deny that you have the expertise behind you explaining to you what roadblocks and why, why that might create long-term problems for the country. And I think you'd find that same level of dedicated staff from NIH scientists, like myself, former NIH budget, budget nerd, to DOD civilians. We have, I really think we do ourselves a disservice not investing in them, because they keep us honest no matter who is in power here. And that's why we have the investment in career.
Well, let me ask you this. What are you planning to do to fight the recent erosion of expertise and morale at OMB?
The first step is asking you to consider seriously rebuilding. We have what we call RMO, so the office that deals with, they're almost by subcommittees. If you think of them as how we separate appropriation subcommittees, so each of them looks at pieces of the budget they're experts in. We've seen extreme erosion in the environmental staff, in the international and defense staff. But if you look at where we would put the staff, we try to rebuild evenly across all of the offices of OMB. Really, I just want to reiterate, this is not about me. We will see the fruits of this labor if you approve it after I'm gone, this is really about making sure that the American people are served.
Well, thank you, Acting Director Young, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Mr. Stewart is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And Ms. Young, thank you for being here. We're proud of you. It's an honor to have you. Congratulations. I appreciate having the chance to talk with you last week. And as you said, to have a robust conversation today. I'll simply say I recognize this as the president's budget, and I don't believe it's fair to criticize the messenger. I believe it's your job to defend this budget. I understand that. I think it's a difficult task. I think, frankly, some of it's nearly indefensible. And I want to mention just a few before I get to my question, but they're so troubling to me. And by the way, there's many more that I would mention, but just for clarity of time, I won't. I don't understand how the budget request for defense is actually below the rate of inflation. And the reality is that is a cut to the Department of Defense. If we're not keeping up with the rate of inflation, that is a cut to the Department of Defense. I just think that's inexplicable in this day and age. And by the way, when other agencies are getting double-digit increases, I think this turns a blind eye to the realities of the world. At a time when we've got approaching nearly 200,000 illegal boarding crossings every month, the president's proposed a reduction in DHS funding. And finally, one more I want to mention briefly is the Hyde Amendment. This has been bipartisan for generations, including it was bipartisan support from the president. I don't understand why you'd take such a divisive proposal and insert that into the budget. But the thing I want to approach on or focus on, Ms. Young, is some of the numbers, and some of them have already been mentioned by the ranking member. Consumer price index increase of 4.2%, highest in a long, long time. And as the pandemic economy grows, the federal government spending, I don't think that the federal government spending helps the problem. I actually think it makes it worse. I mean, we're talking about $6 trillion spending every year for 10 years, which will be at least a $1.3 trillion deficit every year for 10 years. And I know you've partially answered this question, but I'd like to re-ask it, and maybe with more specificity. And that is, if the consumer price index were to, say it's 4.3 now, but say it was 10%. I mean, at what point would the president become concerned and suggest, well, we probably need to address and reduce our spending? If the CPI was 10%, do you think the president would be willing to cut spending at that point? Or at what point between now, it's 4.2, when the president says, no, we want to suggest more spending, at what point would it be too much? At what point would the CPI be too high and the president want to address the spending and the deficit?
Congressman Stewart, thank you for your question. It was a pleasure talking to you. Look, we have our hands full dealing with, real life recovery out of pandemic. We certainly won't pontificate on, hypotheticals in the budget. Clearly, inflation is one thing we look at when we're dealing with a complex, trying to bring a complex economy out of a pandemic. I'm not sure anyone in this generation has ever had to do that. But what we're seeing now does not indicate that this is a long and persistent issue. And I'll remain that the long-term indicators matter and whether we are well anchored in those indicators. But what we're seeing are, we believe, base effects coming out of a pandemic year. But absolutely, we have to, monitor the situation closely.
And that's actually leads me to my second question that I wanted to follow up with you, Ms. Young, and that is, I understand that we've had some choke points in supply chain, but that does not explain by itself, it doesn't begin to explain the pressures on the economy, and I think these inflationary pressures. And yet we're told by you and the president and Ms. Yellen and others, these are transitory. What evidence do you have that these actually are transitory inflationary pressures? I mean, when we're suggesting the type of spending that we are, when the Federal Reserve, as we know, has, I think, used virtually every tool available to them, why do you actually believe this is a transitory and not a systemic long-term economic environment where we're going to be dealing with inflation perhaps for years?
I'm happy to say this isn't just the administration saying this. We're also looking at, and we think we're in similar places, market forecasters So yes, if we were the only people saying that, I would understand the concern. But we are in good company in believing these are short-term transitory effects of the economy.
Well, and I'm out of time. I appreciate it. I mean, again, I don't think you answered my question since I was asking what the evidence is. I know there's some people who agree with that, but people are wrong all the time. Economists are wrong all the time. My heavens, I am an economist. I was trained in economics, and I know we're wrong frequently. But Ms. Young, it's good to be with you, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Mr. Bishop is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me welcome the Acting Budget Director, Ms. Young. Thank you for your conversation earlier in the week. And let me associate myself with the laudatory remarks of Chairman Quigley, Ranking Member Womack, as well as Appropriations Chairman DeLauro. I think I could speak for the entire Appropriations Committee in saying that we're busting with pride to have one of our family in that position. You have a portfolio of skills that are needed to effectively lead the office, and we're glad you're there. Let me go directly to my question here. On January 19th, 2021, the Metropolitan and Micropolitan Statistical Area Standards Review Committee posted recommendations to OMB concerning changes to the 2010 standards for delineating metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas. These recommendations would raise the minimum population of cities that constitute the core of metropolitan statistical areas from 50,000 to 100,000. The proposal will go into effect in 2023. Under the current rules, metropolitan statistical areas have urbanized areas of 50,000 or more people. The latest OMB recommendations could have significant unintended negative impacts to the 6 Georgia cities that are currently located in designated metropolitan statistical areas, as well as have devastating effects on rural communities throughout the state. Our rural communities are concerned that more micropolitan areas would increase the competition for federal funding that is targeted for rural areas. In March, there was a bipartisan letter that was signed by 15 Democrats and 38 Republicans, which was sent to OMB expressing our concerns about these recommendations. Can you give the subcommittee an update on the status of these changes?
One, Mr. Bishop, this issue, unlike any other since I've gotten here, shows bipartisanship is alive and well. I've heard from members on both sides of the aisle, Senate and House, about the problems this, if it went into effect, would create. We had a public comment period. You probably know after the initial change was released January 19th, we heard the outcry, but we also thought that it was appropriate to continue an open process, and we received public comments. I'm waiting for the analysis from staff about what the public comment showed us, and we'll make our final decision based on the comments we get or we receive from that public comment period. And I certainly hope, given the hugeness it means for many locals and their programs, I understand the nervousness it's creating, that we can make a decision soon.
Thank you for that. Let me switch gears for a moment. Can you tell the subcommittee what you envision the role of the Deputy Director of Management to be under this administration, especially in relation to the Director of the Office of Personnel Management? The Director of Management responsibilities are codified, I think, in 31 U.S.C. 503. In your view, are there any amendments to the statutory authority that would better define or clarify the DDM's position, and in what specific ways will you expect the DDM to assist you in managing and administering the agency?
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. This out of OMB doesn't get nearly the attention it should. It's extremely important as we talk about the management challenges throughout the government. You often see in the GAO high-risk list, many of those are management challenges that have built up over the 2 decades. So I certainly expect Jason Miller, who's our Deputy Director for Management, he was confirmed by the Senate, to tackle those issues heads on. Typically, we work very closely with agency deputy directors who often deal with like the day-to-day management issues. Jason has begun meeting with all of the confirmed deputy directors to get a head start on these really tough issues that have been persistent problems like human capital. We have to get right. And speaking of human capital and how we work with OPM, we expect he and the OPM acting director will keep a close line of communications. Often OMB will send out the broad management guidance to agencies, and OPM will follow up on the detailed prescription to agencies on how they expect implementation of the broad OMB guidance sent out. I don't think that's different than how other administrations have dealt with the OMB management role in OPM. So we expect that to continue, but we expect a significant focus. We're sick of seeing some of these issues never get resolved. And I know Jason is up for the challenge, and we expect big results.
Thank you, Ms. Young. My time has expired, and so I yield back my exhausted, unexpired time.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Joyce is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Quigley, and it certainly is a pleasure to be with you today, Acting Director Young. I know this may surprise you, but I want to ask you about the sage grouse. Obviously, Amadei must have his volume off because now we had a lovely discussion the other day about the Great Lakes, and I won't bug you about the sage hen or whatever the hell it's called. And I appreciate that the president's budget, while increasing it, did not. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative did not go to the $375 million that was authorized. But I'm sure that as you move the numbers around, you'll be able to find the appropriate number there. But as you also know, the pandemic has unfortunately led to a troubling rise in addiction and drug abuse in many communities across the country. This is especially concerning for Ohioans, where the work we've done to combat the opioid epidemic is at the risk of coming back after we were starting to finally make a downward turn. In February, I introduced H.R. 654, the Drug-Free Communities Pandemic Relief Act, which would boost federal resources for drug-free communities program and put money in the hands of local leaders to identify and respond to drug and alcohol problems in their communities. The Drug-Free Communities program, which is funded by this subcommittee through the Office of National Drug Control Policy, has a proven track record of reducing drug abuse. How does the president's FY22 budget support this and other programs which are critical in responding to this concerning upward trend of addiction we've seen over the last year?
Congressman Joyce, I didn't hear you that well, so if I don't address anything, feel free to ask me to, and I think sage grouse, so I'm just going to talk about drug-free communities. But the budget includes $1.4 billion in discretionary funding for health workforce programs in HRSA, which is an increase of $156 million or 13% through that program. Within this amount, the budget includes $268 million for nursing programs, an increase of $4 million over last year. The budget also includes increases for behavioral health training and activities that seek to improve the diversity of the healthcare workforce. But I know this issue is of great importance. We're also investing in ONDCP, which you pointed out is in the financial services area. We include a $4 million for administrative expenses over the 2021 enacted level for a total of $106 million to ensure that ONDCP can provide DFC coalitions with appropriate oversight and timely responses to technical assistance. So not just ONDCP, we tried to present a fulsome budget that deals with this very critical issue. I know many of you have been leaders in responding.
Thank you. The pandemic has also taken a toll on our healthcare workforce. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay. Which has unfortunately experienced growth and retention problems for years. Without action, we don't have doctors and nurses to keep up with the demand. One troubling report from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Stats projects an additional 175,900 openings for registered nurses each year over the next decade. As a co-chair of the House Nursing Caucus, I've made the nursing workforce a priority since coming to Congress. I'm also in love with a nurse. This happens to be my wife. I was glad to see my bill, the Title VIII Nursing Workforce Reauthorization Act, signed into law last March. Continued resources for this and other similar programs are crucial. Lacking healthcare workforce puts stress on healthcare professionals and limits access for patients. What does the president's FY22 budget do to address the shortages in this critical sector?
Congressman Joyce, I'd like to point out we provide $1.4 billion for health workforce programs in HRSA, including $268 million for nursing programs. We also include increases for behavioral health training. So we think we do provide a robust budget there, and I hope this allows you to point to that leadership you provided for these areas when you talk to your wife, and you should take credit for being a leader here.
Happy wife's a happy life. And I was just kidding about the sage grouse because I saw Amity come back strolling in with his lunch and everything else. I just want to give him indigestion. I'm out of time. Thank you very much, Chairman Quigley.
Thank you. Mr. Pocan is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to see you, Acting Director Young. We miss you, and we're very excited for the position that you're now in. If I could just make two quick comments, kind of responding to some questions that people did bring up. You know, I just did a roundtable with a bunch of restaurants in the district, and I've been an employer for over 32 years here in my district. And I can tell you UI is not the problem. A lot of our industries are still really hurting. They're not back, and people need the unemployment. I think when more people get vaccinated and things get to normal, there'll be less COVID adversity. That's what I'm hearing a lot from people going back into the workforce. So I think if we all work on that, including maybe Republican members of Congress getting vaccinated, we'll all be better off and people will be getting back into the market. So I just want to mention that. And to the questions on defense spending, as I mentioned to you on our call, you know, I do think there have been a lot of overdue investments that I think the president put in his budget. Very grateful for those. However, on defense, in the last 4 years under the Trump administration, we had a 20% increase in defense spending at a time of relative peace that artificially rose, you know, made the number increase quite a bit. And just the increase alone that President Biden has is more than 50% larger than the entire CDC budget, just the increase. So put me on the other side of the column from those other comments that you got, just so you have those. My question today really is you know, I'm so glad we have investments now in a lot of areas that have been neglected for a number of years. But what really got me was an article that came out this week that says you may be paying a higher tax rate than a billionaire. And I don't know if you got a chance to see this from ProPublica, but I'll tell you, it was pretty scary in the sense that, you know, a lot of in fact, almost all of my constituents are paying a higher tax rate than people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Michael Bloomberg and others. And, you know, when you start seeing how they've been able to get around paying taxes, it's pretty extraordinary. In fact, at one point, I believe it was Jeff Bezos claimed a $4,000 child tax credit because of how he was able to maneuver his taxes. So I guess my question very specifically, because I so strongly believe in the investments that you have in this budget, is, you know, what is the president's budget doing to tackle this particular problem? And what can we do to make the wealthy and the ultra wealthy, that is pointed out in this article, contribute and pay at a level that's more in line with where all of our constituents are actually paying taxes?
Yeah, Congressman Pocan, happy to talk about the tax policies in the budget. I do want to point out that I won't comment on, you know, individual tax mentions. There's an investigation going on about that particular story. So putting that aside, I would like to point out that as of 2018, the richest 400 Americans were actually paying a lower effective tax rate. That is the total amount of taxes as a share of their income than a household making around $75,000. So we do see the inheritance tax, the capital gains piece, raising the corporate rate, not back to even pre-tax cut levels. as a way to begin to bring some equity and fairness into the tax system so we can make those investments in a fiscally sound way.
Yeah, I'll tell you that tax fairness, I finally was getting around my district a little bit post COVID, and, had a conversation on this article actually with some folks down in Rock County and in my district. When you look at how they've been able to, basically they don't give themselves an income, right? All of their actual income is through these other investments that are rates that none of us can actually pay. It really skews it for the wealthiest and especially the ultra wealthy. So have you guys looked at anything that we can do on the ultra wealthy so that they could perhaps pay a greater percent of what they are holding, as opposed to, just raising that top rate? If they're already not paying that top rate, unfortunately won't get after some of those folks.
Yeah, we also do think if you look at inheritance tax, which, you do pass that level of wealth on from generation to generation, that is one of the ways the tax policy here could help bring that fairness to bear in the capital gains changes we have proposed in the budget. I know others have ideas that aren't reflected here, and we'll have to continue to, enter into debate about that. But we do think the inheritance piece and the capital gains piece does do something about this inherent unfairness.
Great. Thank you. No, I agree with you, and I appreciate that, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. If we could all make sure that we are muted when we're not talking, please. Ms. Torres is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman and Acting Director Young. I love saying that out loud. It's really great to see you again, and welcome to our committee. During your time on the Hill, you helped pass historic legislation, and I look forward to your continued success at OMB. I'd like to turn your attention to an issue that is incredibly important to me, and that is the status of 911 dispatchers. Before I ran for public office, I worked for 17 and a half years as a public safety telecommunicator. The experience drove me to run for office. As a public safety telecommunicator and 911 dispatcher, every time you pick up the line, you make life-altering decisions. I regularly coached people through CPR. I talked people out of suicide. I provided situational awareness to officers during armed pursuits and many other very dangerous situations. I talked to a fleeing suspect, one specifically, who barricaded himself inside a mini mart while he held a gun to the head of a cashier. And of course, I will never forget 11-year-old Yahida as she screamed her last words, "Uncle, please don't kill me. It is not my fault," while being shot 5 times point blank after her head was bashed against the wall of her living room. The work I did was protective. I was present in the room when those crimes occurred. And the courts confirmed that and agree with that statement because I often was called to court to serve as the witness to the crime. In the case of little Yahida, there was a dispute of how many shots were actually fired. I heard 5. I told the officers 5, and eventually they found 5 shells. I was present. Because of the protective and stressful nature of this work, PTSD rates for this profession are around 18 to 25% compared to combat veterans. Unfortunately, OMB's Standard Occupational Classification, SOC catalog, categorizes public safety telecommunicators as office and administrative support occupations. This includes secretaries, office clerks, and taxi cab dispatchers. This is based on an outdated view of the work that is actually being performed. To classify a profession that has primarily female workforce, many of whom are single parents as secretaries, is antiquated. and it needs to be changed. So to address this problem, I introduced the 911 Saves Act, a bipartisan bill that directs OMB to classify public safety telecommunicators as protective service occupation. However, we don't need to wait for this bill to pass to update this classification. OMB can change the SOC to reflect the accurate nature of this profession on its own. So Acting Director Young, will you commit to re-examining the misclassification of public safety telecommunicators under the SOC?
So one, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I want to thank you for your service. I mean, what a harrowing role to be in, and I have such strong feelings and support for what you described, and also the honorable work other dispatchers do across this country. You don't think about it often, but hearing you explain that, I think, brings it to the forefront for all of us. So thank you very much. You're absolutely right. OMB does periodically revise the SOC, the Standard Occupational Classification. It was last revised in 2018, and we need to make sure we get input, including yours, when we next update that document, and we'll make sure to consider everything you brought up today when we review that. And I encourage I hope all participate in that public comment process, because we really do make better decisions when we hear from those who've done the jobs and who know how these jobs really are. So I want to thank you for bringing this up and bringing it to my attention.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Kirkpatrick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. Thank you to the director for appearing before us. Couple of questions I have for you. First of all, it's great to see you, and you've been a tremendous help to my office, and I thank you for that. It's really made a difference for my district, and so thank you. I was especially pleased to see that you're seeking funding to restore OMB's paid internship program. I use a lot of interns in my office, and it allows us to hire a diverse group of talented individuals who may not have otherwise been able to afford living and working in DC. How important do you see this internship pipeline as being to OMB's future? And in a broader sense, how does this budget request ensure OMB is able to fill its ranks with top-notch talent moving forward?
One, federal budget work is not something you find a lot of experts even amongst government employees. So we absolutely, need a pipeline of people who are experts in this field. The internship is one way to develop that. I talked about the Presidential Management Intern Program, now Fellow Program, that OMB has greatly utilized. I participated in that. I'm, diverse in many respects, racial diversity. I'm from a small town of 1,600. I'm not quite sure I would have found my way into the federal government, into federal budgeting, if it wasn't for an intern opportunity that allowed me to really think about federal budget. Even if I was interested in government, it's not the first thing people think about when they think about government service. So I've seen it play firsthand with myself, and I think all of us know we're better served with people from geographic diversity, from ethnic diversities, all walks of life of the American people, because you want people looking at budget resources from different vantage points, and that's really what we're trying to achieve.
I really appreciate that answer. We want a diverse group of talented individuals, and I think the internship pipeline is a great way to fill that. I have one other question, and that's, in addition to sitting on FSGG, I also sit on the Defense Subcommittee. So I certainly understand how important it is that the United States have a strong national defense and well-funded and equipped military. That said, it's clear defense spending has grown disproportionately quickly to non-defense discretionary funding. The president's budget calls for an over $100 billion increase in this non-defense spending. In my view, this is an incredibly important investment in our nation's future. But I'd like to hear from you as acting OMB director. Why is it so important that we rebalance the scales and make sure we're investing in at least as much in non-defense spending as we do in defense spending?
One, if we could take a step back and talk about this line of defense and non-defense. And remember, in non-defense, we also have several things that ensure that this country, remain competitive with countries like China. It's just as important what we spend on research and development to remain leaders in the world. Our economic strength is just as important as the strength provided through our military might. So the increases you talk about non-defense discretionary, to us, there are necessary pieces to maintain our position in the world and rebuild that position in some ways. One place we're rebuilding is in diplomacy. I think General Mattis said it best. You reduce your diplomatic budget, you may as well buy him more bullets. This budget reinvests to make sure that our strength is not just in one place, but it is in our economic outlook, and it's in our diplomacy. And that's, I think we have to look at national defense from that broader lens.
Thank you so much. Like I said, it's great to see you again. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence is recognized.
Thank you so much. And to our amazing interim acting chair, whatever your title is, you're amazing beyond titles. I want to take a moment to focus on the president's budget. A federal budget is a statement of our national values. The budget is a once-in-a-generation investment in America to help grow the economy, create good-paying jobs, and to make us more competitive globally. My question is, President Biden has said he wants to make racial equality the business of the entire government. In addition to programs that deal exclusively with racial equality, how are you working to ensure that the issue of racial equality is considered in everything budgetary what the government does?
Thank you for that. Congresswoman, the foundational human values of equity, justice, and fairness are embedded throughout the president's budget, and I'm proud to have been a part of that. You can see this budget's commitment to racial equity in everything from housing and healthcare to education and small business support to addressing the climate crisis and criminal justice reform. You forget about climate with regard to those equity issues, but that's exactly why we have robust funding in our environmental justice pieces that you see mostly in EPA. It reflects this administration's view that advancing racial equity requires a whole of government approach. So it goes even beyond the budget and how we implement programs, make sure we're using a lens to ensure that taxpayers from all walks of life get those investments back. And that's also a great way to grow the economy, to make sure we aren't leaving people behind and that our government's working for all citizens. So you see it in our budget, you see it in the executive order the president signed on this issue, and we're fully committed to making sure this isn't just a short-term initiative, but just a different way of looking and doing business.
Thank you for that. I appreciate everything the president has done, and I want to count on you in your role as director, whatever status that is that you will continue to use your bully platform to raise your voice when you see the budget leaving that place that we are leaving the racial diversity. I have one other question. The pandemic has worsened the challenges, including the physical infrastructure, lack of access to childcare education. And the childcare is something that's very important to me as the co-chair of the Women's Caucus. How does the president's budget help create long-term solutions to deal with these structural issues, healthcare, education, childcare?
Congresswoman, one, I'd like to point out there are several pieces you have to look at. On the discretionary side, we make a historic investment so that the annual budget is more reflective of probably shortfalls in the block grant program that existed for a long time. We've increased that program by 25% to $7.4 billion. But also what's needed is a transformational investment, and you'll find that in the families plan. So we think it's important that both on the appropriation side with the annual influx of the block grant, that has to also be, to ensure that when families runs out in the long run, we are spending up so there isn't also a big cliff at the end of the family plan. So we certainly hope, Congress looks at both those pieces. We think they work well together. They're complementary. So we need both the large investment in child care to be transformational, but the appropriations, the annual process to slowly build to make sure we're keeping up with inflation in a way that we haven't been over the last probably more than a decade in child care.
Thank you so much. That's why we need you in this position, and I'm so glad you're here because
COVID's been a problem for a lot of people, but I'm getting reports from not just my state, but other states that they've done a lot better. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that a lot of people, that particularly those states that rely on sales taxes, saw a lot of online sales activity. And because of a Supreme Court ruling, that money is now being collected back by the states, and they're doing very well. So, because this is taxpayer money and a lot of it's borrowed money, the question is about that second tranche. Given the fact that there are surpluses in places like Arkansas, even California, Wisconsin, others, shouldn't we maybe claw back some of that second tranche of money if in fact we find that it hasn't necessarily been as big a hardship as we thought it was at the time we passed that bill?
Congressman Womack, the push and pull of federal spending has always been, people want to obligate quickly because they don't want these questions to arise. Well, if you didn't spend it fast, you don't need it. What we want state and locals to do is have an adequate planning process. You saw the first tranche of state and local spending last year. Many of them said they didn't have enough time. So the effort here is to make sure we aren't pushing just for the sake of pushing. We want to see fully developed plans that make sense. That's why we think it made sense to spread that out. And I heard on the radio the other day, tribal nations praising the additional time. They thought the first CARES Act, state and local, didn't give them enough time to adequately plan. So, we want to see the time spread out and make sure people are making wise decisions, and we have time to look at these plans so we know the money is going to service the people we want. And I'll point out also, Mr. Womack, we had a strong jobs package, but if you look at numbers, but if you look under that 559,000, we aren't seeing as strong of local government numbers that we need to see. We can't have state and local employees go on the unemployment rolls. So we still see some indicators that show state and locals aren't necessarily doing well everywhere.
Well, they're doing well in a lot of places, and like I say, if in a perfect world, who wouldn't want the federal money? But the fact is, this is a form of generational theft. I mean, we're giving money out where there is not a definitive need, and we're going to ask future generations to pay for it. And I just don't think we really should be doing that. The last question is this. You know, I referenced you in my opening about the Joint Select Committee on Budget Process Reform. We didn't quite get across the finish line. We did some things. Where are you right now? Obviously, if you took a vote of the American people right now, if the budget process is working in the federal government, it would be a resounding not no, but hell no. Where are you right now with advocating for some changes, i.e. biennial budgets, debt to GDP targets, certain things that can constrain Congress's desire to want to continue to move these debt numbers higher and increase deficits? Where are you in relation to a timely budget process?
Ranking Member Womack, I have to remind myself every day where I sit. And on this one, I have to say that the congressional budget process, that really, is for the congressional body to make a determination what works best for them. I will say, of course, clearly from this perch, we want to see as quick as on-time appropriations measures as possible. Government agencies are best when we have and work best for the American people when we have full year appropriations. So we certainly do watch the results because those matter for how we serve the people. But as for how you get there and make sure you have a system that gets on-time bills, I would leave that to you all. We have a separate branch of government, and I respect greatly, your authority through the Constitution to make those decisions.
Well, we're not doing a very good job of it. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the hearing. I yield back.
Thank you. At this point, through staff, I understand that Mr. Bishop may have another question, if he's still on.
I am, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for yielding. I'd like to ask the director. The American Rescue Plan departed from previous emergency response legislation in one major way. The spending was mandatory in that it was appropriated by the authorizing committees rather than discretionary spending by the appropriations committee. As a result, the programs historically funded with annual appropriations, such as the pandemic response by the Centers for Disease Control in Georgia and rural development programs that fall under my subcommittee's jurisdiction, received mandatory appropriations through the authorizing committees. Can you tell me whether or not this approach is a one-time anomaly and that the Biden administration won't take this approach in future White House funding packages in line for congressional action? My understanding of the rationale for the mandatory spending approach is that it turned on concerns about sequestration of discretionary spending. However, it's also my understanding that the mandatory spending also triggers sequestration and that the Congress already suspended that action as it affects Medicare in April. So if Congress can obviously suspend sequestration for mandatory spending, then why couldn't Congress do the same for appropriated discretionary spending?
Congressman Bishop, in many of the same ways I answered Ranking Member Womack, it's a similar concept. We propose a way we think makes sense from a budgetary standpoint from the administration. At the ARP, we did a similar assessment where we asked for specific programs. Here we're asking for them in either discretionary or mandatory. But really how Congress answers that call is up to you. And, that decision is much more yours on how you move, and we're not going to get in the middle of process decisions. We want to see it done. And you raise interesting points, but, frankly, past administrations have made requests of Congress on mandatory side or discretionary side, and they've answered the call for that spending on the opposite side of that ledger. So, you have the authority to make those decisions. We want to see these investments made, but I think it's best left to you and leadership on how best to make sure that investment happens.
Thank you very much, and I do have to respect the seat that you are now in, as opposed to the former seat that you held. thank you very much for your cooperation and your testimony. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Womack, I don't believe there's any other questions on the Republican side. Is that accurate?
Unless Joyce has one. David, do you have any questions? Okay, yeah, Mr. Chairman, we're finished.
Okay, and the staff has informed me that there are no more other than myself on the Democratic side. Is that, if there's nobody else yelling at me, I'll assume that their staff is accurate. So that being the case, I'll take the last crack. And Madam Acting Director, I know you heard about this, issue before and all your time working on this, and I understand you heard about this in confirmation time. The Army Corps of Engineers and the OMB repeatedly making changes to their work plans, including removing essential projects for us relating to the Great Lakes. Our 21 bill included bipartisan statutory language preventing OMB from using funding to alter the work plans. And the energy and water bill also included a provision related to this, but we understand OMB staff is still making significant changes to this. Could you explain what the philosophy is there and the practices, and how we can avoid these issues as we go forward?
Yeah, and we are just as like the MSA, I've heard probably the second most on the Army Corps process. And we need to work through some things because you're absolutely right. We are seeing, unfortunately, that probably did happen, some of the worst case scenarios, and I heard it from both sides of the aisle. I think OMB does serve a role in any administration to make sure that agency decisions are in line with the president. That's the role OMB should be serving. Certainly not to go out of our way to change projects based on who we may or may not like on a given day. These are national projects. They matter a lot to local communities, and we need to take that process seriously. So you have my commitment to do that, to work with Army Corps as a partner. Often my limited tenure here is that has not been the case. I've met with the acting head of Army Corps. We're waiting on a confirmed director, but we got to get this right because the frustration is real, and OMB, we can do better and we will do better, and we're working through that process.
No, and I appreciate that, and we know you're new at this. I think the most important thing is if there are issues that OMB wants to raise, communication first is always, as you know, very, very, very helpful.
And Mr. Chairman, we haven't had a work plan process yet. We get the work plan after you give us an appropriation. So that's where, I've, at least in my limited time here, seen where some of the, shenanigans may have occurred. So
Okay.
we have some time to make sure that does not happen, and serve a role, to make sure they're aligned with the vision when they send out projects, but not anything more personal than that.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Mr. Ranking Member, do you have anything to say in conclusion?
Not at all, other than congratulations again, Director Young, and we look forward to working with you.
Yeah, and Director, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. Now we'll begin phase 2 of the 3,000 questions we have left in your opening day before us. But
that's really directed to the staff.
Again, we wish you the best. If we can help, let us know. Otherwise, thank you so much for your service and your help, and everyone involved today, especially the staff. And at this point, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.